So we've covered the first episode, acquisition, getting all excited, bit of window shopping, getting thinking, how am I going to make some money, looking at land before all the real work gets involved in feasibility. And then I got scared. And then I got frustrated, knowing I was going to have to deal with authorities, but I couldn't tell them how frustrated I was going to be, and I'd have to be very not politically correct. I'd have to toe the line a little bit with my communication style and make sure I keep people on board. And now, so we're moving into revenue. So when I think of revenue, I'm thinking, where do I get the funds from? How much is it going to cost? Settlement? How am I actually going to make money out of this? Where do I get the money from? How do I look after it? And how do I make sure I get plenty of it back, or at least a decent margin on the end of it? Is that about right for revenue, or what's the... Yeah, take us through it. That's why you're here, Steve. You're the expert.
So really, that's the sort of latter part of it. There's a whole preceding component, and this is where a developer makes their money is in creating the right product for the market. So understanding the demand, right? What is the demand, and what's the demand for? So the product, right? What does it need to be? Is it 1 bedroom units? Is it 3 bedroom units? Is it 4 bedroom townhouses? What's the product that's in demand, and who's going to buy it, and what they're going to pay for it? Now, if I know that 3 bedroom townhouses are in demand in a particular area, I know that my target market, people in their 40s and 50s, for example, with not infants as kids, but in that tweens and young teenagers sort of age group, stairs are not a problem, right? So that's cool. They're running up and down all the time. So if I look at that and I look at and I go, okay, majority of the target market, couples who are young executives, one of them may be working in a very high-paying job and the other one's staying home looking after the kids, or they're both working in sort of mid-level jobs, right, to earn that that household income. Then I can sort of form a view of what their ability to pay is, and then I can create a product that meets their needs, creates something that it meets some of their wants as well. Remember, with property development, we have needs and wants. I want a Lamborghini or a Ferrari or, a McLaren, whatever brand is the whiz bang thing that, you want a sports car. But, I've got a wife and I've got 3 kids, so I need a family sedan. Lamborghini doesn't meet it, right? If I've got the ability to pay for something more than a Toyota Corolla, for example, a Toyota Corolla meets my needs. It's squishy in the back, depending on how old my kids are, but that's a family sedan. Nothing derogatory about Toyota, right? Just an example. But if I can afford a BMW, car dealer, car manufacturer, whatever, I know people want family cars. I know they can afford a more expensive and higher quality, 5-seat vehicle. Well, that's why we have these brands, these other brands, like BMW, Mercedes, Audi. It's sort of that hybrid between meeting your needs and your wants. You want this whiz-bang supercar, right? Well, you can pick one that's sort of in the middle that you can put 3 kids in, 5 people in, but it's a bit zippy and, it's got some prestige attached to it. So that's what we're looking at as a developer is it's providing the right product that meets people's essential needs, but delivers on some of their wants to a price point.
And that you get through back to one of the earlier episodes we did where your network is, you're dealing with real estate. So you're chatting to a lot of those people, like in this area, what are people coming to you saying that they're needing? Is it a family area because of the school, or is it a retirement area? Or so, and how granular do you need to get into to understanding the prospective market? Because I'm guessing in some suburbs, or in a lot of suburbs, you probably have quite a wide range of people in different demographics around incomes, children, no children. So how do you, does that come down to the street, perhaps, or the couple of blocks of streets around the area, or how granular do you get into that information?
First, you have to start with the bigger picture. understanding the demographics of the area that you're considering. So the Bureau of Statistics, the ABS, has a lot of data out of the census. So first and foremost, you've got to understand what the trend is that's happening within the area. So most places have got an aging population. There are some areas that have very few kids, then have a heap of people in the sort of mid 20s to sort of mid 30s, and then it tapers off and they don't have a lot of older people. And then you've got the other areas that got a heap of kids, but in the 25 to 30s, there's not many people, right? And then it explodes out again. Different areas. So, for example, I'll give you an example of that in Sydney, because I'm in Sydney. Ku-ring-gai, up in the north shore of Sydney. So in that local government area, so a huge population of young, like middle-aged and older executives, large blocks of land. It's a well-to-do suburb. Lots of kids in private schools, but most of the kids, but it's boring. All right, it's boring. It's very conservative. So a lot of the kids go to uni, find out there's a real world out there, and then they'll go and move to somewhere, and this is the comparative example, is an area sort of called Leichhardt, which is the inner western suburbs of Sydney. Yeah. So they move there for, lifestyle for the 25 to 35-year-olds. But when they start having kids, right, all the housing over there is very small. It's terraces, very confined, no big backyards, all that sort of stuff. But they grew up with big backyards.
Yeah.
So they can see the value when you've got kids to heading back to where they came from. So they move back because, good schools, big space. So they come back when they're sort of in their late 30s, early 40s. So you look at the population spread, the age of the population in different areas, and it tells you what age groups you've got to provide for with your product. So we do that. And then you've got to look at the trends. So if you look at the last 12 years, the last 3 census data, it'll tell you what's happening, whether the older population is getting older, whether there's younger people coming in, what the trend is, what's happening, what's changing in those particular areas, because that gives you an underlying big picture of what is required in that area. Now, once you've got that in your head, then you can go and say, okay, I understand this has been trending, but when you bring that down to the ground, you've got to get to know the area and say, okay, what are people actually wanting? And this is where research. It's all about research, and talking to agents is the best place. They'll tell you what's selling, what's not, who's looking, right? What they're buying, why they're buying it. Real estate agents are a wealth of knowledge on current market trends, and they'll say to you, look, if I had, heaps of 3-bedroom townhouses, I could sell them tomorrow.
Yeah.
That type of thing. Those are the sort of throwaway comments, if you like, that agents can just come out with that are gold for us as a developer.
Yeah.
So you do have to sort of look at the big picture to get an understanding of what's been happening, because don't just rely on a real estate agent.
Yeah.
They're trying to sell a product.
Yeah.
But grain of salt with everything that anybody tells you. You've got to ground truth it yourself and find out.
Yeah.
So as a developer, if we go through that process and we get to understand what's needed, there's no one set product. It's like saying I'm going to build an apartment building and I'm only going to put 2-bedroom units in it, right? You might have a majority of your units being 2-bedroom, but there is demand for 1s and 3s. And when it comes to your authority approval, you also have to understand what the authorities know is in demand. Because they might be saying, look, we've got a huge amount. If you've got a substantial population of over 55s, one of the trends that's coming out throughout our society is a huge number of divorced mums, 55 years of age and older with old teenage kids, where the husband has been the one doing, working, and then they've got divorced, and suddenly, there's the fight over the maintenance and all that sort of stuff. And quite often a wife in that situation is left, almost destitute. So there's a hell of a lot of, accommodation that's required for these type of people. There's also domestic violence and all that sort of stuff. So the authorities will be looking at, we need to create more of this product. So they're going to drive you through your approval process to provide some of this smaller, cheaper, more accessible accommodation.
Yeah.
So you've got to consider all of that in what you do. Then once we sort of understand who's buying and what they need, we've got to understand the size of the properties that they need. So when I say a 2-bedroom unit in New South Wales, we have apartment design guide, and you've got something similar in Victoria and all over the country. But we have an apartment design guide, and it has a minimum internal area for a 2-bedroom unit of 70 square metres. Now that doesn't mean you have to build minimum 70. You can build smaller, but the authority can reject you on the size of your apartment if you do.
Yeah.
But if you meet the minimum requirement, they cannot reject you on that basis.
Yeah.
But that 70 square metres is a 1-bathroom.
Yeah. Yeah.
Does a 70 square metre 1-bathroom apartment work, 2-bedroom apartment work in the area that you're looking at? Most areas in Sydney where people can afford to buy, you're looking at maybe 80, 85 square metre, 2-bedroom, 2-bathroom units. And if you don't do that, it doesn't sell. So again, you've got to understand the product that you're going to create for people to buy. Otherwise, they're going to have no interest. With that, you're then able to say, okay, and I suppose if you want to think of it this way, that's risk management, because how do you know what to develop? What, someone else is developing 2-bedroom units, so that's what I'm going to do? Or somebody else is doing townhouses, so I'm going to do what they're going to do? Now, that's a massive risk, because you're just trusting that what they're doing is right.
Yeah.
But they might be trusting what somebody else is doing. You don't know. So you got to satisfy yourself from your risk profile perspective about what is important for your target market. Because the more accurate you are about what your target market's needs and wants are, and the product that you've got to create to meet that, then from a risk perspective, you're not likely to cop a hiding when you put the product on the market.
Yeah. And am I right in saying that when you say it's not going to sell, it probably would sell, but it's not going to sell at the amount that you need it to sell at to make the last 2 or 3 years, or however long you've invested in it, actually worthwhile doing it to pay back, as we just covered, particularly on authorities and all the time it takes to do all that. You've got to have the return. And I suppose this is the big issue in the industry generally, is that developers are cognizant of the fact that selling price doesn't cover the risk of all the hassle, time, money spent, investment. So it's getting the price has to hit that level that you need. And obviously, the better your understanding of what the market is and what the market needs and wants, and how you can get something into the price range you need it to be. Failure to do that, it's not just not selling it, but it's not getting to the price. If you don't get to the price, you're basically limiting your loss. But that's not why you've got excited about this from day one, is it? You've got excited because of the hitting the minimum profit and above is where you want to go through having the right product.
When we set a profit margin, that's not our maximum. That's our minimum. That's what we want to achieve at a minimum. So if we can exceed that, of course, we're going to do that. One of the things we look at is, if I don't achieve my revenue is the biggest number in your feasibility, therefore it needs to get the most attention. It's a no-brainer. And if you don't achieve your revenue, you are in all sorts of trouble. So you have to know what your revenue is. So that's if you're going to start a property development project, you have to know what the product is, where it needs to be developed, what the price is that you're going to sell it for, and if there's potential for you to increase that price before you put it on the market. So revenue is not just about, pocketing the cash. You've got a whole process to go through before you even look for a site. So I have to know what the revenue is in an area. I have to know at a high level, we talked about high level feasibilities. I have to know at a high level whether or not developing that product in a particular area is going to be profitable before I even send a letter out or knock on a door to try and acquire my site. Revenue is massive. This is where the don't want to spend the time doing research, want to rely on what other people are doing. Okay. Well, you're just taking a whopping great big risk. And why would you do that? If you want to make money, why would you take a big risk on the biggest number in your feasibility?
Yeah.
That's stupid.
I suppose you can always go down the local boozer and go on the pokies if you want to gamble, essentially. You're not gambling. It's stacking the opportunity that it becomes not a gamble, and it's just a matter of how much revenue you make, hopefully, rather than risking and gambling and chucking in more money in the hope that it gets to you where you want to be.
Yeah, if you can, development, risk management, identify the risk. What is your risk? That I can't sell the product for the price that I need. All right. Okay. So what are you going to do to mitigate that risk? Research. Okay. So what type of research? No, start with the high level stuff that we've already spoken of, and drill down. Those are the things. I mean, it's good to go and see what competitors are doing. Don't get me wrong. That supplements the information that you have to make your decision. But don't rely on what the competitors are doing, because when they started doing what they're doing, it may have been right. The market may have changed now. So, that's I'll give you another example in that Ku-ring-gai Council area that I mentioned, right? So because it's got an aging population, they're all large estates, etc. Getting the older people out of their lifetime homes to downsize is very difficult. And they've got big blocks of land. They don't need that size. So they can actually downsize and give it to a family who needs that, or sell it to a family that needs it, a family that can afford it. But there was a developer who really did something unusual. They did a development that was primarily 4 and 5 bedroom apartments, all high quality, massive apartments, 2 and 3 car spaces, close to the rail, close to the shopping centre, all the facilities, all nearby. Now, those apartments sold for massive prices. They convinced people to downsize. So is meeting the market. So someone who lives in call it a mansion, they don't want to downsize into a 2-bedroom unit. They're never going to do that. But if they can downsize into a 5-bedroom unit where, they've got their bedroom, she's got her study, he's got his study for whatever their interests are, and then they've got 2 bedrooms for when, the kids and the grandkids come to visit, or friends from interstate or something like that, they're okay. They'll take that if it's got a big balcony and all that sort of stuff, and it's high quality.
Yeah, no, I've seen exactly that. When I first came to Australia, I lived in Davidson, believe it or not far from where you're referring there. And the couple that sort of put me up in the ground floor self-contained apartment, my best mate's in-laws, they sold that. They'd been in their family home for years. The kids were my age. They'd moved out, and they bought a place in Manly. But it was but it was big. I remember I went in to visit them. I was like, oh my God, it's like it was 2 tennis court size space in here. It was massive. And that's because they've got the grandkids. Their 2 kids have had kids, and they had a nice view, but it had access to everything they needed. It was still spacious, having lived a spacious space. So yeah, it makes perfect sense what you've said there. It's very, very logical. Just back to the census data, something that I thought about, and obviously the censuses are undertaken every 4 years. So how far back do you go? Do you look for trends such as, back in the 80s and 90s, there was, the number of children in the under 20s grew exponentially, and then the next couple, that under 20s dropped off. So the assumption is once they get into the late 20s and 30s, they're perhaps going to come back to the area. So you're not just looking at the last 3 or 4 years or 8 years. You're going back over 12, 16, 8, and longer than that to sort of see what might be coming back. Can you start seeing that kind of stuff in the data?
Yeah, absolutely you can.
Yeah, okay, yeah.
For me, I go back 3 census, 12 years. I want to see what's happened over the last 3 census because that's the recent trends, if you like. And that's more relevant to what I'm doing. I mean, if we talk about, data and long-term data, contemplate this. Australia in 1910, the average number of persons per household was 4.6. Now the average is like 2.6 per household. But you go, okay, that's substantially less, which means we might need more accommodation. Because if your population doesn't change and you halve the amount of people in a household, you need double the property to accommodate them.
Yeah.
So straight away, that goes, there's demand for property. Okay. From a developer's perspective, fantastic. That means there is a need for me to create property. Then you've got population growth over the period as well. And, we've gone from, 5 million to 25 million, over 120 odd years, and you go, okay, there's even more demand. Then on top of that, you look at the number of single person dwellings, households, in the census data, you look at that, it's been growing exponentially. So a lot of 1-bedroom or 2-bedroom units needed for single person households. When you look at that, that's all big picture trends, and it tells you there is a market for property, okay? And it gives you a guide on the type of property that it's required. Another one, in 2029, the last of the baby boomers turns 65. 25% of our population is going to be, in retirement age. Now, what does that tell you? There's demand for property to suit older people. Massive demand. But you also need to know that the under 18, generation now, they're virtually 25% of the population as well. So what are they going to need and their parents going to need sort of as it comes through? So you look at all this stuff and you've got to say to yourself as a developer, where's the opportunity? Where is their demand? The NDIS is a big thing at the moment. Massive black hole in the government's budget. It is growing exponentially.
Just for people that don't know NDIS?
Sorry?
Just for people who don't know what the NDIS is?
National Disability Insurance Scheme, I think it is.
Yeah.
So that provides funding for people with disability to help them with services. And one of the components of the NDIS is rental assistance. So people who have psychological, mental issues can get a particular type of housing. People who, and there's a sliding scale of disability. And as you slide up the scale, the rental assistance that you get becomes higher and higher and higher until, you can get, $100,000 a year in rental support if, you are, severely disabled and you need all those services. So developers are starting to look more and more at providing accommodation for purpose-built accommodation for people on that NDIS scale to utilise or benefit from that rental assistance.
Yeah, makes sense.
Now, that's great. It's highly complex. I've looked into it. It's not for me because it's very, very difficult to achieve good outcomes, financial outcomes. So from that perspective, there's not as much NDIS housing occurring as what the demand is. At a point, there's going to be a tipping point where it'll do one of two things. The government can't keep pumping all this money into the NDIS. So if you focus on the NDIS, you've got to be careful because every year governments redo their budgets and the NDIS can cop a hit.
Yeah.
pulling back, no more rental assistance. And if you've locked in your whole development ideology into one niche market that is run by government and at government's behest can grow or shrink, you are taking a massive risk in your development business. So for me, that's not something for me. I don't want to invest all of my time and effort into a particular niche when government can just snap their fingers and it dies.
And I suppose that was what I was starting to think about. My next question is, and that topic there, that I mean, what developers look for is some level of certainty in what their feasibility tells them actually comes to pass, and that the things that they've considered.
Absolutely.
When you're looking at your market, you're looking at who potentially is going to buy it. But within the research, when you're looking at the revenue you're going to generate on what you eventually sell, are you looking at things like government, what the NDIS call it, government schemes to try and provide the society a certain type of living, a certain standard of living? Do you then start looking at what government policy is, what the news is, and what they're talking about regards to policy, what local councils are talking about regards to policies in their local area? And also, do you look at like the proposed budgets for things like, I don't know, parks, leisure centres, upcoming train lines, or like you're also looking at that sort of stuff as well as who's actually going to buy the property at the end and give you the revenue? Like, are you looking in these other spaces as well for data and information to measure your risk?
Yes. So, yes. And a classic example is just recently I was interviewed on radio station 3AW in Melbourne Talkback. And it was about the government's proposed changes to negative gearing and how it's going to impact on the housing market. Now, government hasn't made a decision. We know that the previous Labor government, who back in, what was that, in 2019 or took earlier than that?
Yeah, 19 before COVID, yeah.
Bill Shorten was the leader of the Labor Party opposition at that time, and he wanted to change negative gearing laws, and he lost an election. Now, as a developer, we've got to be cognizant of what government are doing, and just, I don't want to get into a political argument about whether it's good or bad, but I'm a developer. I have to have a point of view on what all this sort of stuff is going to do, because it's a risk for me. Negative gearing is something that supports people to buy a property and get tax benefits if that property loses money. You can offset the loss against your income. So you get a tax benefit from it. But what it does, it encourages people to buy an investment property, which is a property for the housing market, the rental market.
Yeah.
You know, you're providing a house for someone who can't afford one to buy it and live in it. So you're providing for the rental market. The other thing that it does, when that person gets to retirement age, that's their income. And instead of being a burden on the public purse, they have an income to support themselves through retirement. So they become a self-funded retiree. Now, if you muck around with negative gearing, what happens is that a lot of people are not going to have an investment property. I'm a developer, ballpark, rule of thumb, generally speaking, we say half of our product is the investment market. So what if you take that away? Now it's going to be really, really hard for us to make a development stack up, and we won't provide housing. So what happens to all these people who cannot afford a house?
Yeah. Yeah.
So, all this sort of stuff, this big picture stuff, we have to form a view about what that means. And if government changes, like I've just recently locked into a sort of 40-unit development up in Newcastle, right? If they change the negative gearing laws, what does it mean for me on my development? Because I've locked in. I can't get out. I'm in that, I'm stuck. So if they change the laws on me, right, and suddenly investors aren't part of my world anymore, I've got to change what I'm doing. That's a massive risk. So, I've got to be aware of what that is. Whilst they're only talking about it, I have to be aware of it. I have to form a view as to, if it did occur, what am I going to do? But I don't have to instigate anything at this point in time.
Yeah. And would I be right? So within that, and again, not judging negative gearing one way or another, but I'm guessing then, so based on what you've said, let's say half of your sort of target, generally speaking, half of your target market is investors. They remove negative gearing. So essentially, you're potentially losing half of your people to sell your property to, which means the demand to buy your property or properties is dropped. And therefore, the likelihood is, based on economics, the price you can reach is going to drop. And therefore, you're not going to get the minimum revenue target you need to get at the end. So I'm trying to think of the right word. You're buggered, essentially.
So it doesn't necessarily mean that.
Okay, yeah.
What it could mean is that because half of my apartments who are going to sell to these investors have to sell to owner-occupiers, it's going to take a lot longer for me to sell my apartments. Now, that will impact on my revenue because it's time.
Yeah.
There's going to be holding costs and all that sort of stuff. So it's going to impact on my bottom line. But generally speaking, if I produce a high quality product, owner occupiers will buy it. I mean, through COVID, most of the investors disappeared anyway, and owner occupiers was the only market that developers could really target because they will pay product that they really want. But that means I've got to spend a lot more money on my building and be really certain about what I'm putting in my apartment, because an owner-occupier is very, very focused on what they want in their apartment or their townhouse, whereas an investor, it doesn't matter for them because it's just an income-producing asset. So they're not as fussed about the carpet, the bench top, the tapware. They just don't want to have problems. They want it to last and they don't want to have maintenance. So, the drivers are different. So I need to revise my feasibility to reflect that change in market. Doesn't necessarily mean it's from a revenue perspective. Maybe my revenue is going to go up, because if I'm not producing investor stock, but there is demand for owner occupiers, then I'll just keep producing owner occupier product. So I need to identify that and provide for that.
Yeah.
Knowing your market.
And I've had on the previous podcast Jeremy McLeod, who's an architect and does a lot of work for Nightingale, which sort of speaks to sort of slightly disadvantaged people that are looking to have a secure home and accommodation, but also affordable. And he was talking about reducing the size, because there's a lack of space, apparently, reducing the size of properties, but then having a higher quality build. And also within that, there's a lot of, there's the general design standards for accommodations got to be at quite a high level, is what developers tell me. But then also there's a growing aspiration, I suppose, from a lot of people on sustainability and materials and carbon footprint and embodied carbon and this, that, and the other. As a developer, I suppose this is just another thing that now comes on to the sort of considerations. Whatever product I'm thinking about creating, I've got to think about what the attitudes of the market is towards sustainability, towards heating and cooling systems, and towards car spaces and electric and all that sort of stuff. So how do you sort of tap into that sort of, and that's more of a mindset of the prospective purchasers? Yeah.
So you have to know your target market. It's as simple as that. If I'm creating a product for, 25 to 35-year-olds, sustainability is going to be throughout what I do. I mean, sustainability is expensive. It comes at a cost, at a financial cost. If you want to save the planet, right, you've got to pay for it. And most people are happy to say, let's go out and save the planet. But when it comes to you've got to shell out the money to do it, they're not keen at all. So you've got to find that balance between what can you do for basically no cost, no additional cost. So what can you change to do that? And then above that, it's giving people the choice of what to do or not. So, for example, there's the National House Energy Rating Scheme, NATERS.
Yep.
Now, ordinarily, generally apartments are, give or take around 5 out of 10, with 10 being the best. If you create a product that's 7-star rated instead of 5-star, it's a substantially additional cost for construction. And you go, but that's only 2 stars. No, it's not only 2 stars, it's another 20%, right, in sustainability. And that comes at a massive cost. But if I do a 7-star NAIDES rated build, so I'll give an example. For me to produce a 2-bedroom apartment for just an average, mid-level socioeconomic sort of area, normal apartments might be 75 to 80 square, like 2-bedders, might be 75 to 80 square meters with 2 bathrooms, and they might sell for $900,000 in the Sydney market. If I'm going to do a 7-star NAIDES rating in the same location, same apartment, I've got to build a 70 to 75 square meter apartment to sell it for the same price.
Yeah.
So I've got to drop 10 square meters to pay for it and sell it for the same price. Are people willing to pay the same price for a smaller apartment because it's more sustainable? And and this is where we as developers have to be really smart. If the target market is demanding sustainability measures, right? You go, great. Okay. If I compare a 5-star to a 7-star, what I have to do is I know there's an additional cost. B, I know I've got to shrink the apartment to pay for it. But to be able to sell it, what I have to do is a comparison between over the next 10 or 20 years, if electricity prices are X dollars per kilowatt or X cents per kilowatt, right? What does it cost to run that apartment as a 5-star compared to a 7-star, right? The other thing is, do you need air conditioning? In a 5-star, absolutely you need air conditioning every day of the year. It's just going to get hot and it's going to get cold. Whereas a 7-star, completely different thermal design. You only need air conditioning on the stinking hot days and the freezing cold days.
Yeah.
So you're going to drop the need for air conditioning by somewhere between 60 and 75%. Now, the saving in doing that is massive. The other thing that I want to be able to do is say to people, look, you want to save the planet? Here's the opportunity. I've done 7 stars. If you want air conditioning, that's optional extra. Because if you want to destroy the planet by running your air conditioning, you've got to pay for it. We're not going to put it in. We're going to support the planet. But if you want creature comfort with your sustainability, you're going to have to pay.
Yeah.
So
you have to, you either pay for it or you have a much smaller or a noticeably smaller space for the same price.
25 to 35-year-old market, I'm going to build something that's got sustainability written into it. If I'm looking at 55 plus, the attitude of the majority of 55 plus is completely different to that of the 25 to 35s. 25 to 35s, you must save the planet. Yeah, save the planet. 55 plus, as long as I don't have to pay for it, it's okay.
Yeah.
So it's very different.
And we're talking about here, obviously, new developments, primarily within the topic of this particular episode so far. When it comes to knowing your market and the product you're going to develop, if I'm buying that house next door, that sort of 1970s flat roof, a little bit aged, it's probably the cheapest property for sale in the area at the moment. When I'm looking at renovating it and what to do there, because, obviously you can have good outcomes from the renovation, the development, the renovation that you do, or you can have bad outcomes from that because you haven't quite got it right. Do you have, I assume you don't have to go to the same depth of study or research to make sure you can, because if you're in a nice area, there's always appetite to buy houses here. So how do you then approach how far to renovate it and how far not to?
To sell?
Yes.
So you're renovating for profit?
Yeah. So I buy it, flip it after a couple of years.
You're a property developer. You're a property developer. The amount of research you do has to be commensurate with the risk that you want to take.
Yeah. Okay.
So if you want to go in and go, I'm going to change this, I'm going to change that, I'll do this, whatever those things are, where did you get the idea from? Yeah. Why are you thinking that? Right.
Yeah. So on a TV show,
seen 47 homes in the last 3 months and found what has sold?
Yeah.
I mean, the thing when you're renovating anything for profit, what sells? What do people want? And I have a friend, real estate agent, he sold real estate in a particular area in Sydney for 15 years. And he used to say to me, I cannot believe that the women in this area all want X plus Y, right? Because they were the decision makers. They're the decision. The husbands were there with them, but it's the women who made the decisions. It was their home. And he said, they all want, cottage kitchens and Hampton-style second stories, right? So this is in a conservative area of Sydney. After 15 years, he said, you know what? I'm going to buy a house, renovate it, put a Hampton-style second story, and do a cottage-style kitchen, a country-style kitchen, and do a sort of conservative heritage sort of bathroom in the place and see what happens. So that was, 15 years ago. He now does 3 at a time as a developer. He's always got 3 properties on the go at any given time. One is, he's going through the DA process, right? Getting his development application, getting approval. Next one is a house that he's actually renovating at that time. And the third one is he's living in one of them that he's renovated. So he's got 3, right? So when he gets the second house finished on the renovation, he'll move into that and he'll sell the one that he was living in. And the one that has the approval going through becomes the one that he starts renovating. And then he goes looking for the next one to do the approval on. So he's rolling them over all the time, and he lives in them.
Yeah.
He lives in the completed product basically for 2 years. In New South Wales, under our Home Building Act, a builder has the liability period is 2 years for general defects and 6 years for structural. So he lives in the home for 2 years in the general defect period, and then he sells it. So it's virtually a brand new home. It's outside the defect period, so the new owner can't have some cracks in the ceiling and a gap in the floorboards or whatever, right? And it's got a little bit of, bumps and bruises, a little bit of lived in scenario. But the beauty of it is, and he's a builder, right? So he became a builder through this process. So he builds these things, and he's making a fortune, an absolute fortune. But he knows the market. So what do you put in that place with the flat roof, etc.? The market might be saying you got to have a second story. And what style is it? Is it full brick? Is it brick veneer? Is it some form of cladding? That's this Hampton style sort of thing, which is just sheeting and a bit of timber work. What is it that the market really wants in that area? If you're in a younger area, it's going to be super trendy type of stuff. So what does that mean? What is super trendy? Well, you've got to go and find out. If you want to go and find out, then you're going to benefit from that. But if you're too lazy to go and have a look at, 50 open homes and see what they sell for and understand what does and doesn't sell, if you don't want to do the research, you take a risk.
Yeah.
And that's why property development is it is not a get-rich-quick scheme. It is a career. You can't just buy, renovate and sell without knowing what's going to sell, what your renovation's going to be, what you're going to get for it. So we're very focused on that. So, that's the front end. Once you know what the product is, you've got to do a feasibility. You've got to know what it's going to cost you. So how much is it going to cost? What's it going to cost to develop it, to design it? What's it going to cost to go through, the DA process with council, the permit process with council? All of these things we have to understand before we go looking for a site. And so we can't look at the what I classify as the 5 fundamentals of property development in isolation. They're all linked together.
Yeah. And then, so one of the things we covered when we were sort of deciding what to include, or that you include within this revenue episode, is exit strategies and settlement. So we've gone through we've got what we think, or we're comfortable enough to take on the risk to look to develop something. What is an exit strategy, first of all?
Well, first, getting into a development project is really easy. Buy a site. Really simple. You could, just banged everything then. You can buy a site, so it wasn't an earthquake, everyone watching, right? So it's just me going bang on the table. So getting into it's easy. Getting out is hard. So an exit strategy is how you can extract yourself from that project. And we look at it from a number of processes. One is exit strategies along the timeline. So when we start, where can we get out? So if we've optioned a property, which is, using that, commit to it now, committal, right? And in 2 years' time, you've got to sign on the dotted line, and that's when you buy the site. If you use an option, you can option a property and sell that option. That's an exit strategy. So one way of getting out is to sell the option. Another one is you get the approval and then you sell the option. Another one is just walking away. If you've got a call option, which is an option that gives all the selection, the choice to you, you can walk away. That's a exit strategy as well. But when it comes to you have to settle on the land and you own that land, you might choose to settle on the land because by the 2-year period or whatever it is, the property might be worth a lot more, particularly with your DA on it. You might sell it at that point. And then obviously the last one is you develop the product and sell the product.
Yeah.
So they are all exit strategies as you progress. If you look solely at the construction period, right, where you're actually going to commit to building the thing, the question is, how are you going to divest your product? So what's your exit strategy for divestment? So do you use local real estate agents? Do you use local project marketing real estate agents? Do you use the global agents? Do you use these property clubs? How are you going to try and sell them yourself? What is your exit strategy and what are the costs associated with those? Because when you look at, if you're selling a product off the plan, and this comes down to risk management, my thing is I will pre-sell everything that's in my development before I commence construction. And the reason I do that is I want to know I'm going to get a certain amount of money as soon as I'm finished. I want it all to come in and I want to be done and dusted. Some developers will say, look, I want to sell half of my stuff now because I believe that prices are going to increase over the next 12 months. So I want to sell them at a higher price in 12 months' time, or I want to wait to the end because I know, people will pay a lot more money for a finished product because it's easier to sell something when people can come in and touch and feel the kitchen bench, look at the sink, the oven, the bathroom, all that sort of stuff. Whereas when you're selling off the plan, you're selling a dream. So it's different sales techniques. So, your local agent who sells, I've got a 2-bedroom unit I want to sell, they bring people in to touch and feel and look. Local agents will have a database of potential local buyers because a lot of people like to invest in their own area. So as an investment property, less so as an owner-occupier, unless they're looking to upgrade. Most people don't downgrade into an off-the-plan sale. So most of it is upgrading. So understanding that your local agent who doesn't sell off the plan all the time won't have a mindset to be able to sell a dream. They sell the reality.
Yeah.
So then when you look at project marketers, local project marketers that Australia only, those project marketing companies, they sell off the plan all the time. So, they've got local databases, so for example, in the last episode, you mentioned the Mornington Peninsula, right? So in the Mornington Peninsula, you've got the local agents. Then there'll be some Melbourne-based project marketers. So if you're doing the 6-pack of townhouses, you might get those project marketers to do that, and they'll market to their database in Greater Melbourne. So they'll have a bigger database than the local agent who's only going to market in the peninsula.
And I guess their database, they'll be the magnet for people that want to invest in that type of product. So naturally, they're going to be able to access the people you want to see your product.
But you pay for that. Your local agent's fee is going to be this much. Your project marketer is going to ask for
it
that
goes
much.
up. Of course it does. Nothing goes down.
When you've got the larger scale projects and you go to the multinational firms, their fees this much.
Yeah, because they're selling dreams again. They're not selling. And
they're selling it offshore as well.
Yeah.
So they're sharing it around the globe. So your market exposure goes through the roof. So generally speaking, when you use those guys, and the other thing is if they want to sell your product, because there might not be enough property in it for them, no money, so they don't worry about it. You're just a drop in the ocean. They'd rather sell the 300-unit development for that other, large-scale developer. But if they were to sell your, boutique townhouse development, like I had 14 townhouses. I went to one of those, got the Premier Mob in Sydney with this, upscale 14 townhouse project. And they just said, we'll sell that from one email out to our database because of its location. No
did
problem at all.
Did you say, well, you can knock a couple of percentage off your fee then? Or did you say,
No, they increase it.
Yeah, I thought that
because of that.
Yeah. It's funny. Yeah, that's the recruiter's trick. They say, well, you should be cheaper. So hang on, I've just got you the best people, the quickest. So surely you should pay me more for doing a better job. It's not the time it takes them to do it. It's basically you're paying them for you to increase the likelihood of getting the revenue that you need. And it's an investment, basically.
Expertise. I've been in the industry 44 years, right? So if someone says to me, can you do something for me on an hourly rate? And then they go, your hourly rate's that much. We can get someone else to do it for this much. And you go, get them. They might have 10 years experience. I got 44. You're paying for my experience, not my time. If you ask me for a fixed fee to do something, it's the same thing. My fee might be, I own $100,000. They might be able to get it for 50. Well, get it for 50. Go. If you're getting someone with 44 years experience for half what I charge, you got to ask yourself the question, why?
Yeah.
So anyway, all that sort of stuff, we'll put that aside. So an exit strategy is how you're going to get out. I mean, then we've got this property clubs. There are investors clubs, around Australia that charge annual fees for their people, and they recommend things, projects, locations, etc. So if you approach them and said, "Oh, look, I've got this development in Mount Martha," all right, we talked about in the previous episode. So Mount Martha, I've got a dozen townhouses, 3-bedroom townhouses, blah 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 blah. You go to them and they go, "Okay, we'll sell them to our network. We charge a fee to do that, and you have to give all of our purchasers a 5% discount on top."
Yeah, okay.
Exceptionally expensive. I mean, seriously expensive, and that erodes your profit margin. But you need to make a decision whether or not you want them involved, because sell everything in one go, you've got certainty. All right. So, all these things come at a price, expediency, costs. If you want to take it, selling them to yourself. When was the last time you sold a dream for $800,000? Here, would you like to buy a Property Development Institute cup? It's only, I don't know, $20, and it's like, no, thanks. Right. And it's like, why? It's a high quality cup. It's got a great branding and logo, and someone might say, I'll give you 10. Or will you throw in a free, training course? Like, I can't sell an $800,000 apartment because I don't have that skill set. It's not what I do. I'll create it for someone, but I need somebody else who's got that skill set to do it. I don't design my buildings. I'm not an architect. I'm not a structural engineer. If you're going to do that stuff, you need to be expert in that field.
Yeah.
So I think from the exit strategy, it's all about how are you going to get out at the various stages all the way through, and how are you going to pocket the cash? So that's a segue into pocketing the cash. Settlement risk. Settlement risk is where you pre-sell everything and you get to the end of your project, you've issued notices to complete so that people are advised they have to pay for the product, and people don't pay. People go, like the market hasn't gone up. The bank's valuation came in, $100,000 less. I can't borrow that amount of money anymore.
Interest rates have gone up and now they're stumped.
Yeah, I've lost my job. I'm divorced. Whatever, all these different things happen. Life happens, to people everywhere, every day. Life even happens to us, so we have to deal with it, whether it's yelling, screaming kids at, arsenic hour, or whether it's, having an amazing lunch with the family, whatever it might be. But settlement risk is about how do you ensure that you can pocket the cash when you're supposed to. So if my feasibility study says I pocket the cash on the 31st of December, which happens to be, in the Christmas holiday, let's say my project's going to finish then, smack bang in the middle of the Christmas holidays, in the standard shutdown period between Christmas Day and New Year's Day, that's when it's all happening. Straight away, the lawyers and conveyancers who work for your purchasers, they're all going to say, sorry, we're on holidays. We're not going to settle. We'll be back in mid-January. You're at peak debt. Your debt is the most because you borrowed all the money to do the building. Your interest bill is ticking over because you borrowed the biggest amount of money. So we call that peak debt. You're at peak debt, and every day it is costing you a multa. So when they say, sorry, we're on holidays, that doesn't help you. It costs you. What do you do about that? So what you have to do is have a strategy as you progress and get closer and closer to keep in contact with your purchasers. Tell them when everything looks like it's happening, advising them that settlement is likely to be on the 31st of December, and that you're aware that everyone's on holidays. They're going to have to make sure that their representative has someone available. Otherwise, it's going to cost them money if they don't settle, because we are able to charge penalty interest for them delaying on a daily basis. So we have to make them aware you've got an obligation, a legal obligation to settle on this day. If your lawyers are not going to be able to do that, you have to be aware it's going to cost you more money. So you've got to be telling people this to make sure they arrange for their lawyer to be available for that settlement during that period.
And I'm guessing within that, if you're doing bigger developments, or even, that next door's knocking that and doing 2 or 3 townhouses, that's about then having either a real estate agent or yourself or some process set up that they're on a journey of, you've seen videos about the construction or this, that and the other, and they're enthusiastic, and you keep them on even if life happens negatively for them, they're still emotionally enthused by the project and keen, and they're going to move, because you really want to make sure that they move hell and high water so that when you get in a jam, they're still keen and they don't ghost you and disappear off and when you're at peak debt. There's things you can do within that to try and keep them in the funnel, so to speak.
Yeah, we must have emotional connection between our purchasers and the property that they've purchased. So one of the things that I do is, and a lot of developers do this, when someone exchanges contracts, so let's say it's 18 months out from completion, from that moment on, they go into an email, they start getting emails on a a monthly basis. And they get told all about the area that they bought. They get told about, little insignificant things like the local park, it's, Washington Park. So explaining to them why it's called Washington. Why is it Washington Park? Who is Washington? And explaining that, so if there's anything that's named something nearby, it's telling them about it. The street name, maybe the street name that your development is on has some significance. So it's talking to people about those things, snippets of information. We're 3 kilometres from the local shops. It's a 7-minute walk or 15-minute walk or a 2-minute run, whatever it might be. Reminding people about all the reasons why they bought the property there. And the other thing we do is we give them progress. We tell them progress. So one of the things, we do is we say, we will start construction when we have 100% pre-sales. What does 100% pre-sales mean? To the vast majority of people, it means when you sell all your product. And it's not.
Okay.
100% pre-sales means when we sell enough property to cover 100% of the debt.
Gotcha. Okay.
So if we're doing a project that we need $10 million worth of debt and there's $15 million worth of apartments, we're not selling the $15 million, we're selling $10 million worth of apartments.
Yeah.
So
Gotcha.
that's what we call about 100% pre-sales. We would be telling them, this month we're at 25%. This month we're at 50%. So we'll be giving them progress scores. We'll tell them that we, awarded the building contract. We'll tell them we're having a groundbreaking ceremony on such and such a day. You're all welcome to, to come to the site and have a barbecue. And then every 3 months, every month we'll get construction photos, and every 3 months we'll do a barbecue on a Saturday afternoon after the builders finish work, and we'll get the builder on site to make sure they've got clear, safe access for people to walk through parts of the site, depending on what stage of construction is. People love getting their shoes dirty. And if you've got prospective purchasers as well, so if you haven't sold it all before you start construction, here's your chance to bring prospective purchasers in to meet with purchasers and to come and have a look at the thing. Because building sites are exciting things. Now, I still get excited when I walk on a building site. It's just ridiculous, but I do.
Yeah.
And then as you get closer to settlement, you start advising people about, look, when you purchase the apartment, let's say it was a $1 million property, when you purchase at $1 million, right, you would have got pre-approval for a loan, so you knew what you could borrow. Be aware your lender may not lend the same amount of money. So they might have said 70% back then. Now they might have said, look, we've got a lot more property in this area that we've got mortgages on, so our exposure is high. We're only lending 60% against properties in this area now, right? So you need to warn people of what their lender could do to them, and that they should have a number of lenders that they might need to go to just in case, right? So that's number one. The other thing is we have to explain what when you get the lender, and you say, okay, loan application, let's go. They get a valuer to come and value the property. We have to explain to the incoming owner, the purchaser, that the valuer is highly unlikely to value the property at the purchase price, because they're valuing for mortgage purposes. It's not a market valuation. So it is likely that your $1 million apartment is going to get a bank valuation of $900,000. So it's not a reflection of the value of the apartment. It is a conservative valuation for mortgage purposes. So be warned that that might happen. So if that does happen and your lender doesn't lend you 70% anymore, they're only going to lend you 60%, you've got a big gap that you're going to have to fund. So be aware that this could happen to you, right? and make sure you are prepared for that. And for people who have a problem, we need as a developer to find a broker who deals with the second tier lenders who will lend, up to 70, 80, even 90% against a property if the people have got income. So we line them up so that, but don't worry, if you can't, then we can put you in touch with this broker who's got the ability to blah, blah, blah. So you risk management. That's all I'm doing is managing
have contingencies in place to support the customer, basically, because they may or may not know what risks they're taking, and you need to protect you by protecting them, kind of thing.
Most purchasers, this will be their first investment property or even their first home. So you do have to gently guide them through the whole process. I use a CRM for that, so that I get, a customer relationship management system. And the reason I do that is because I can get to see whether or not they've read my emails. So if they've been on the database for 3 months, I'm going to look at them to see if they've been reading the emails. If they're unopened, I'm going to get on the phone and I'm going to ring them and say, hi, Martin, look, I'm Steve from, the developer. You bought a property from us. It's fantastic. We have been sending you information about the development. Have you been receiving our emails? No, I haven't. Would you be able to check? It comes from this email address. Could you check your spam folder, please? And can you put us on the white list so that we don't get sent to spam? So tell your system that we are reliable so that you get all the important the invitations to come and do functions and all this sort of stuff. It's really, really important. So those are the sorts of things that we have to do to make sure people are engaging with us throughout the process. And why do we do that? It's a pain in the ass. It's an absolute pain in the ass.
Sounds like what I do for a living, Steve. So you're very right.
Well, but we have to do that, to ensure that when we get to the back end, if that valuation comes in as we were concerned about, and if their lender is lending less and they've got a $150,000 hole that they didn't realize they were going to have, what we want is someone not to go, bloody hell, how am I going to get out of this? What we want them to do is go, right, how am I going to solve it? How am I going to resolve this problem? Because if they can resolve the problem, we pocket the cash.
Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah,
it's interesting.
So that's the sort of the big thing about revenue. You've got to get your product right. If you get your product right, then that's a great battle because then it will sell. But selling it or pre-selling it by itself doesn't mean you're going to pocket the cash. There's a whole process you've got to go through to minimize the risk of this settlement risk, right? And then you get to that process. I mean, one of the things, just to sort of wrap up, if you like, at that back end, when we get really close to settlement, we're telling the purchasers, make sure your solicitors are aware, make sure no one's on holidays, make sure all the standard excuses, we'll tell them, make sure you're aware. I will also get my lawyer to send their lawyers or the purchaser's lawyers a letter advising them that this is our indicative settlement period and that we will not accept excuses for people not being, people being on leave, people being sick, all that sort of stuff. They've got forewarning. They have to be professional and approach it. Otherwise, their client's going to suffer, penalty interest.
Yeah. Just one question just before we wrap up this episode. On exit strategies, when you're looking at your feasibility, and I hadn't really given exit strategies as much thought as this before, obviously not on my radar, but it would make sense to me that as I'm doing my feasibilities, I'm also thinking about what my exit strategies are at each step of the way. If all the feasibility I've done and all the assessment and all the risks I'm prepared to take at one stage, I give myself a get out by, well, if that happens, then I've got this exit strategy. If this happens, that. But if this happens, then I won't do that. And we'll keep plodding on. And then, but if I get to this stage and it's not hit these certain things, then I've got that exit. Is that, so you have those exit strategies in your plan? You're not thinking at the time, oh shit, this has happened, I need to have this exit strategy. You have these laid out, good to go, so you plan.
You're always thinking, shit, this has happened.
Yeah.
That's a given. Whenever everything is like, oh, right. But it's having that, and you mentioned a word in there that's really, really important, plan. when we start a project, we have to have a project plan. How are we going to deliver it? And I have my plan pro forma that I use. And, every time I do one of them, whether it's for me or for a client, I go through it and it's horrible. It's mundane. It's boring, but it is critical. It's one of those, it's one of those jobs that, you have to do. You may not like it. Someone I know, their fingernails being cut, right? Just the click, click, click sound.
Yeah.
Just in their head. But they know they have to do it, right? So they have to psych themselves up. It's just phenomenal. It's one of those things. They have to psych themselves up to do the clipping, right? You've got to do it. A project plan is so critical. You just have to sit there and do it. And the way I've set up my pro forma is I've got a series of questions. So they're questions for me because every project is relatively different. So if I start with this, if I had a pro forma document with it all filled in, I'd miss all the important stuff because I wouldn't edit it. But having the questions for myself enables me to go through it and say, right, the answer to that is this. And I will be very specific for each project. So project plan is essential, absolutely essential.
Yeah. As my dad used to say to me, proper planning prevents piss poor performance.
Yes.
Basically. And that's, I've yet to find fault in that, although sometimes I say particularly poor performance, depends who my audience is.
Prior planning and, what is it? Say it again.
Prior planning prevents particularly poor performance. 5. I'll say 5. We're doing revenue. We can't get the 5 or 6 letters right. I'm buggered as a developer.
But that is absolutely true. I've got a business partner who uses that all the time. He's probably a little bit more rude than you are, but he's always uses it. And he's ex-military, right? And in the military, if you don't plan, what's going to happen? You're going to lose your life, or other people can lose their life. So, and the military is really interesting from the perspective of you must rely on your buddies. You have to rely on everyone to do their job. So as a developer, I rely on my architects, my engineers, my finance lawyer, my construction lawyer, my builder. I rely on everyone.
It's an ecosystem.
But I have to do my homework on every one of them to make sure they're the best person for the job that I need done.
Yeah. It's almost, it's an ecosystem. It's a team. You're putting together a team at a cost, and how good are they at their job, and how expensive is that cost, and should you try and reduce how much you're spending on those team players and take a risk, or do you, it's an interesting thing. And it's actually 6 Ps and not 5 Ps, in case I wasn't clear that I can't add up to 6.
So when people say, what do developers actually do? I mean, do you design the building? And you go, no, we don't do anything. No, and it's like, well, what's, what do you, like, well, all we do is take risk, right? And for taking that risk, we get a reward. We rely on everybody else to do what they're supposed to do properly, and then we can make money.
Yeah.
But, I reiterate this thing about if you're a property developer, you are at the top of the tree, because without you doing all of this work to create a project, without you risking your capital to create the project, nobody has a job. Everybody relies on the developer, and no developer, no projects.
Well, on that note, so that's revenue completed. So the next episode, everybody will be talking about delivery, building contract variations. Basically, we're going to move things into construction. So thanks for listening, and I'll see you next week, Steve.
Fantastic. Look forward to it.
Here we are. Good. I'm enjoying this.